It's been over 2 years now since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, with no apparent end in sight. But according to Russian sources in the Kremlin, Putin is ready to freeze the battle lines where they currently stand. And Putin is increasingly trying to use the leaders of foreign governments to help him achieve that goal. Earlier this month, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, visited Kyiv to ask Ukrainian President Zelensky to consider Russian ceasefire terms, the first time he had visited Ukraine on official business in over 14 years. His motives for doing so were suspect at best, as just a few days later, he then immediately flew to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin. This raised speculations that he was visiting to report on his progress in person, revealing that Putin is increasingly desperate to lock in his peace terms. Those peace terms, at least as they have been publicly presented so far, have been dubious, to say the least. Russian President Vladimir Putin has been stating that he would be willing to make peace with Ukraine if Russia were given complete control over the Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia regions. A hard stance, since these are regions that Russia has not yet even managed to fully occupy. To meet these publicly stated peace terms, Ukraine would need to cede further territory to Russia that, to this point, they have successfully defended, including some major population centers, a non-starter that, for obvious reasons, has not been taken seriously by Ukrainian leadership. But while he may be putting on a strong face for the cameras, Russian sources indicate that Putin may not actually be as confident as he lets on in the public sphere. In late May of this year, about a month before Putin's latest iteration of public ceasefire terms, Reuters reported being approached by 4 different in-the-know Russians who desired to remain anonymous, but who shared that despite what Putin would be saying in public, he would be open to peace terms that stopped the war on the currently held front lines. At the same time, they said that Putin would also be willing to continue fighting Kyiv for as long as it took if these terms were not met. It was in all likelihood a face-saving maneuver, with the Russian sources sharing the reality of Putin's current mindset to hopefully entice Ukraine to actually come to the negotiation table, while Putin could take a tougher stance in public to help preserve his image. Then, if Ukraine agreed to his real, private terms, he could portray himself as benevolent or concessionary, when in reality, he would simply be agreeing to the terms he had planned to agree to all along. In either case, it didn't matter. The secret terms were still unacceptable for Ukraine, and so the talks went nowhere, much to Putin's very public frustration. Russian sources close to him have revealed that he is now increasingly irritated, on edge, and desperate for a deal, blaming the West for intervening and sabotaging his plans. So Putin's attempts to secure a ceasefire have not stopped, though his desire to secure this ceasefire doesn't exactly come with the best intentions, as we'll share in just a moment. As further evidence of his desires, and many of Putin's recent public appearances before Russian journalists, talk of a ceasefire with Ukraine has been a constant theme. These events with Russian journalists are widely understood to be staged, with seated questions, providing a safe environment where Russian leadership can portray their desired talking points to the broader world. With ceasefire talks as a recurring discussion, it's obvious that it's at the top of Putin's mind. So, why is Putin so desperate for a ceasefire? Is the world really getting closer to peace in Ukraine, or is there something else at play here? As we dive into answering that question, a quick word from the sponsor who made the research, animation, and editing for this episode possible. I recently partnered with Manta Sleep, hoping to solve a problem that I've been having for a long time, where I've been struggling to sleep through the night, or waking up early in the morning as soon as the early summer sun comes out. Manta Sleep sent me their Manta Sound sleep mask to try out, and since using it, I've been sleeping an extra 30 to 45 minutes every night, sometimes more, helping me feel a lot more energized and productive throughout the day. What set Manta Sleep's mask apart from other masks in my experience has been the unique design where the mask wraps fully around my head and velcros in tight, so it actually stays on. The mask is also fully adjustable, including even the location of the eye covers, making it super comfortable for my specific head shape. And it's made of ventilated material to help keep me cool while I sleep. For this sound mask specifically, it even comes with razor-thin Bluetooth headphones built into the mask, allowing me to quietly listen to sounds that help me fall asleep without worrying about my headphones falling out and getting lost in bed. Manta Sleep has options for all kinds of people, including weighted masks, steam masks, silk masks, and more. If you use the link in the description of this video, or my discount code, Icarus Project viewers can get an extra 10% off Manta Sleep products at checkout. So check it out today. And thank you to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video. So why is Putin so desperate for a ceasefire? Given the current battlefield conditions and the way things have been going for Russia lately, presumably it's because Putin is nervous. He knows he's already been beaten, and he's not confident that Russia can make further gains under the current battlefield conditions. He may even be nervous about losing currently held territory to a Ukrainian counteroffensive in the near future, something that could easily permanently blunt Putin's prospects of victory in Ukraine. But that doesn't mean at all that Putin is ready to give up. All signs show that he's in this conflict for the long term, no matter what the cost to the Russian state and the Russian people. A man determined and motivated above all else by the prospect of making a permanent mark on world history. But in order to make that mark, and actually secure a legendary place in our children's history books, Putin needs to actually win and not lose. So most likely, he just wants a ceasefire so that he can hit the pause button and avoid losing, buying him time to refortify, resupply, and build up reserves of critical weapons. Pausing the conflict would also allow Putin to wait for a better geopolitical climate to conduct the rest of his war, where international support for Ukraine might not be as forthcoming, with the shock of the initial invasion having worn off, and the reality of war in Ukraine now being seen by outsiders as, unfortunately, just the new normal. That conclusion does not originate in a vacuum. Instead, it's based on a preponderance of evidence tracking Putin's actions over the past several years. You see, Putin's latest attempts are not the first time that Russia has tried to pause the war taking place in Ukraine. In fact, this is something he's been attempting to do ever since his initial invasion failed, and he realized he didn't have the strategic advantage he thought he had. In the very early days of the war, when Russia invaded Kyiv, they thought they could take the Ukrainian capital within just a few days or weeks, effectively overthrowing the entire country and turning it into a Russian puppet, if not an outright piece of Russian territory. As that proved to be wrong, Russia found itself in a situation where it was failing to encircle Kyiv, with its troops in a very bad position. The Ukrainian military was performing at a level far beyond what was expected of them by anyone, while at the same time, inferior Russian equipment was failing due to corruption that went much deeper than the Russian government truly realized. Entire Russian convoys were being eliminated overnight, and time was running out before those troops would need to be withdrawn or simply lost on the battlefield. To stem their losses, Russia called immediately for peace talks, which included a withdrawal of Russian troops from key regions of Ukraine in exchange for an agreement from Ukraine to effectively remove its ability to defend itself. This deal would have reduced Ukraine's peacetime army to a size of just 85,000, much smaller than the force it had just used to hold back Russia's invasion. The deal also would have allowed Ukraine to have just 342 tanks in their entire military, barely enough to defend a few key regions, and certainly not the entire country. And the peace terms would also have forbidden Ukraine from having missiles with a range of greater than 25 miles, or 40 kilometers, making it impossible for them to strike Russian supply lines, command posts, or strategic targets on Crimea in the event of a future invasion. There were many stipulations like this, designed to strip Ukraine of the exact capabilities that had been contributing to Russia's embarrassing current state of defeat. The cherry on top was that after disarming Ukraine, the deal also included blocking Ukraine from joining the NATO Defensive Alliance, which could protect Ukraine against future Russian attacks. The intention behind this so-called peace plan was obvious. If Russia couldn't reduce Ukraine's army on the battlefield, they would try to nullify it and disarm it through so-called peace, a theme that has been repeated in all of Russia's numerous so-called peace plans throughout the war. Presumably, Russia wanted to be able to restart the war over again in a few years, giving them time to rearm and fix the issues with systemic corruption that had caused their initial full-scale invasion to go so poorly. In other terms, what Russia wanted to do was essentially to re-roll their dice, or load their last save, this time on a lower difficulty level. Fortunately, Ukraine realized that they were in a war and not playing a board game or a video game, and rejected Russia's terms, much to the dismay of many of their allies and partners. At the time, Russia made it seem like a Ukrainian defeat was inevitable, as did many of Ukraine's Western allies. But Ukraine still rejected Russia's peace terms. And, surprise, surprise, the crushing defeat never came. Instead, Ukraine responded with one of the most shocking and unexpectedly successful series of counteroffensives in military history, exposing the real reason Russia had wanted peace so badly, as they took back huge swaths of their territory, including around Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Kherson. Following this counteroffensive, to nobody's surprise, Putin then sued for peace again, this time with disenchanted sources from within the Russian government coming forward and reporting that Putin was not truly committed to peace. Instead, he was simply stalling for time while Russia's forces trained and replenished for a future advance, confirming what most of the world already suspected or knew. Once again, Putin wanted to reload from an earlier save and restart on a lower difficulty level. It's clear to see why. Since Ukraine's counteroffensives, Russia has not managed to take any truly strategically meaningful territory from Ukraine, forcing itself to be content with small victories at extremely high costs in places like Bakhmut and Avdiivka, managing to take just 25 additional kilometers of Ukrainian territory during the entire 2 years since their initial invasion successes. Most recently, Russia experienced a devastating loss trying to invade Kharkiv once again, being forced to retreat and opening themselves up to new stipulations where Western weapons are now allowed to be used by Ukraine to strike Russian territory for the first time in this war. That fact alone has the potential to further change the tide of the entire conflict, as I've described in detail in other videos. And with this massive failure of Russia's recent offensives, it is becoming increasingly clear, once again, that Russia has little hope of winning more territory under the current circumstances, at least not without significant losses, due to poor Russian supply lines, exhausted Russian soldiers, and dwindling Russian ammunition reserves, to name just a few things. Understandably, Russia wants Ukraine to take the pressure off once again, but Ukraine isn't ready to do that, or to give up their advantage just yet. Taking all this into account, it's obvious why Putin is now desperately suing for peace talks once again. It's also obvious why the world shouldn't take those requests seriously, even though we all desire a lasting peace. History might not exactly repeat itself, but it does indeed rhyme, in a very recognizable rhythm. Unfortunately, many people in the West, particularly in the US Congress, are trying to convince the world that Ukraine should accept this suit for peace. They've forgotten the lessons of World War II, let alone Ukraine's own history from just under 2 years ago, and are adopting the persona of Neville Chamberlain in a world that desperately needs more Winston Churchills, men who recognize that while their own desire may be for peace, or to focus on the needs of their own nation, dictators have other plans that don't go away just because you shove your head into the sand. As the old proverb says, when you meet a swordsman, draw your sword. Do not recite poetry to one who is not a poet. Putin is a swordsman, but he wants the world to think he's just a harmless poet, so that they believe they can defeat him with mere wishes instead of decisive action. Only time will tell what the final outcome of all this will be, but as it unfolds, be sure to subscribe to the Icarus Project for more updates. And also subscribe to my new second channel for more frequent, casual updates on today's geopolitics, from a middle-of-the-road, moderate political perspective that is increasingly difficult to find in today's climate.